Hello everyone and welcome to day 5. Today's a bit of a tricky drawing. Sorry for my audio quality, but we've got to cover it, and I just have a couple things that I wanted to mention about how to tackle this drawing because it's got a couple of tools that are new and that we haven't used before. So I'm going to talk about the steps of tackling a drawing like this. So my first recommendation would be choosing a smart origin. So what do I mean by a smart origin? Well, if you choose a point on a drawing to start and make that point coincident with the origin, you can then, instead of having a bunch of floating elements around and stuff that's undefined, if you have one smartly chosen point as your origin and you have that coincident at the origin, so imagine this is your origin in your part studio, then you can start building everything out away from that. So if you imagine this is the origin, we can start building out the triangles, and then we can start dimensioning out these circles relative to the triangles, which have been dimensioned relative to the origin. So rather than having a bunch of free-floating parts, if we choose, it's always a good idea when you're CADing, generally, typically, to choose a point as your origin and start building from there, even if you chose the center of this circle as the origin or the center of this circle as the origin. But you can get pretty strategic in how you're choosing your origin. So for example, from this point here, you have a bunch of dimensions leading out from that, and then the center of the circle is dimensioned from there. So there's lots of different points that you can choose. The point is you choose one of them and start from the origin, just so it's easier to manage. Another thing I wanted to mention is identifying constraints. So constraints are going to be how you take your sketch from not being fully defined to being defined. So the way that that sketches get defined are with dimensions and constraints. So one of a good skill is to be able to recognize constraints within a drawing. So if you look at these two up here, these two appear to be horizontal. So in this case, you would add a horizontal constraint to both of these lines. Just another thing to watch out for, because that can be the difference between your sketch being defined and it not being defined. Typically, it's, from my experience, you're able to assume what is horizontal and what's vertical, whereas it's not great practice to assume things like angles, because I know you might have seen things in the Discord about people assuming that this was a 90-degree angle, when in fact that's not the case. But another thing to look out for is identifying constraints. Now, another thing I want to talk about is center arcs. So center arcs we've used before, and those are from the same center as circles. So you can use center arcs in part of your drawing. Another type of arc that I'd encourage you all to take a look at in this one is the 3-point arc. And so for 3-point arcs, we can, instead of it having like a well-defined center that you're basing it off of, you can choose 2 endpoints and then add a third point to form an arc. And so a good use case for that would be between this center arc here and this other center arc there. And then what you can then do is make this middle arc tangent to the other center arcs that you have going on, and I'll explain what that means. So what is tangency? So tangency, in short, is basically when you have two features intersecting at exactly at one point. So whether that be a curve in a line or two circles, two curves, or you can see these examples. So you have a curve and a line all intersecting at a point, two circles all intersecting exactly at a point. If you zoom in really closely, it's only going to be one point that they're actually touching. So that's basically what tangency is, and it's really handy in creating smooth features. So if you look here, I'll show this off. If you look at basically breaking down this drawing, so you can imagine one big circle here and another big circle out here forming this arc, and then a line forming up here. When we make things tangent, basically they're only intersecting at exactly one point. So this arc right here is going to be tangent to this other arc out here. They're only intersecting at exactly one point, but what you can get essentially is really smooth running curves, and it makes them look really nice and really polished. So the tangent constraint is really handy and it's really widely used. So hopefully you guys get some practice with that today. So recap: choose a smart origin. Don't just make stuff floating around. keep in mind what's horizontal and what's not. Try out for arcs that aren't coincident with circles, so that don't share the same centers. Try out the 3-point arcs. It's a new tool. You can also have an undefined center point arc, but I'd encourage you to try a 3-point arc just because it's a new tool. There's multiple ways of doing things. And then you're going to be using the tangent constraint. And just keep in mind how all these shapes are interacting together. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.